Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a great one for you as always, and let's take a look at what we got on the show. We're starting with a pretty good story. We got President Xi of China meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. What are they up to? We get to look from the New York Times and trying to get a sense of what it really means, and especially take a look at and really analyze on a critical level what the United States is saying about that. Also, Emmanuel Macron, we talked about him on our last show, and the truth is, for now, he has survived in a very, very narrow, just 9 votes in it, in the Assemblée Nationale, just in a recent vote just a few hours ago in Paris. But protesters are going wild. The police are going wilder. We'll break that all down for you. And also, it's been just over 20 years since the invasion of the Iraq War. We'll take a look at why it wasn't just a mistake, it was a crime, and the real winners of the Iraq War in the long term. Was it the U.S. soldiers who had to deal with landmines and IEDs? Was it the U.S. power? Was it the U.S. government that lost a lot of credibility when it came to military operations abroad and really had its reputation damaged? Was it the Bush administration who definitely did profit from it? Or was it another country just close at hand? We'll tell you. Stay tuned for that later in the show. Yeah, I don't want to give anything away there. But anyway, we start with the top of the show, and it is time to talk about Russia and China. So it's been 3 days after the International Criminal Court accused Vladimir Putin of Russia of war crimes in Ukraine. President Xi Jinping of China arrived in Moscow for a state visit. Again, there's a real big theme of this story is a kind of irony, hypocrisy, whatever the situation is, about just kind of this mirror image situation of this kind of U.S. establishment press talking about China and the things that China may perceive. And honestly, I think both nations should be subject to the same rules, which should be a lot harsher than they are now. But how China might perceive the United States, based on their prior history, that is just not really considered. This is in the New York Times. Xi Jinping, China's leader, and President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia met face-to-face on Monday in Moscow, where Xi hailed the two nations as good neighbors and reliable partners during a state visit that has been watched closely by the West. Well, Chinese officials have attempted to cast Xi as a moderator who can broker a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. Officials in the United States have been wary of China's involvement. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who previously warned that Beijing could provide weapons to Russia, and said on Sunday that the visit amounted to diplomatic cover for war crimes. Oh my goodness. Who could possibly imagine doing that? That is the crime of all crimes. I mean, it's like when you hear that said out loud from somebody who just came back from, MBS's palace in Saudi Arabia, or whether it was his undersecretary, Jake Miller, or whoever, like, that is just incredible. You just have to stop and be like, wait a minute. Like, they just keep going on. He could be providing diplomatic cover for Russian war crimes. And there's an arrest warrant going out, so it's real. And again, personally, I kind of don't really have super strong opinions about Russia and China meeting. I think China's going to do what it does. It is it's definitely a better its government is more it's definitely less sclerotic. It's definitely I think you can argue in certain ways whether it is more, the certain nature of it and certain kind of control tactics and stuff like that compared to the United States, because of all the, very implicit control tactics that I think are probably much better designed in society versus the control tactics, I think in the United States versus the control tactics in China, which are way, way more overt and in your face. and the way we perceive them versus the way what China thinks of us. And I mean, again, it just really just goes back to world perception here. You're talking about Russian war crimes and talking about accusing somebody else of providing diplomatic cover for war crimes. We have spent the past probably ever since 1945 or whatever, when FDR made the deal with Saudi Arabia, and much further back probably in history of examples I probably can't even think of right now. We have spent the entire post-World War II era providing cover for countries like Israel, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries all throughout the world to really, really do some pretty atrocious things. Like, countries that we politically agreed with, throughout the Cold War, and regimes, for instance, in civil wars. We have done that, and we've committed some of the war crimes ourselves. We're saying this on the 20-year anniversary of the Iraq War. Like, this is just absolutely a crazy, crazy situation. So it's like, how, especially when the United States has a literal Hague Invasion Act, we will invade the International Criminal Court if they ever decide to go after one of us for the things that we have done. The American military, will come in and take that person out by force, no matter who they are, American national of any kind. And we're supposed to now be all high and mighty, and the moral authorities on international law to come and lecture China. They're not going to do it. Like, they have no reason to do it. That is something I certainly feel like. I feel like, but I certainly don't think it's like the end of the world that. I don't know really too much about the relationship that they have, but is it the end of the world that, for I think United States interests, that Xi and Russia are kind of coordinating in some way here? No. But really, I think the biggest thing is with when it comes down to it with China, what is Blinken really going to be able to seriously do about it? So anyway, China's official news agency said Xi said his country was willing to continue to play a constructive role in promoting a political settlement in the Ukraine issue. They're not exactly, so this is not someone who is, you saw his kind of peace plan. He's kind of participating in the Russian economy. I think definitely much more to an degree than the United States is, obviously, but the Russian economy still is kind of continuing to grow outside of both those causes, nevertheless. But it really is clear that this is not going to be really going to be resolved anytime soon. It's really outside the power to be resolved by the United States. So, China comes out with this kind of peace proposal, like a kind of a vague 10-point plan for peace, which the Ukraine kind of dismissed, and the West kind of dismissed. But by all indications, other than I think the best thing that people who say China really wants Russia to win is just China, they're really bad, right? Like that is, there's no real, I think, substance evidence that I've seen. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree that I can point to that says, okay, China is really trying to help Russia win substantively on this issue against Ukraine. So yeah, any plan that did not include the removal of Russia's forces from Ukraine would recognize Russia's attempt to seize a sovereign nation's territory by force, so they're saying no. Ukraine officials have made it clear on Monday they consider the idea of peace talks at the moment to be preposterous. The first and main point of capitulation or withdrawal is the Russian occupation troops. Alexei Danilov, the Ukraine National Security and Defense Council, said in a statement. And we are, in this, it seemed to be very little from Russia. But before hosting China's Accord, apparently Putin made a point of showing that he was in control, traveling to Russian-occupied territory of Ukraine for the first time since the invasion began, which is pretty big. He was in Mariupol. He made weekend visits to Crimea as well, which Russia captured after largely destroying it last year. So yeah, that is definitely something that is going to be watched very closely. The summary of the meeting gave no signs of a breakthrough here. I think it seemed with Russia. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see what pressure, I think we'll probably never know this, but what pressure is Xi trying to put on Russia here to do what he wants, which is, maybe resolve this war in some way that's probably going to be favorable to China in some way we don't know. But you know, they are certainly playing a role that I think the United States certainly imagines it likes to, but it imagines itself to have played in the past and maybe even be playing now. But when it comes down to it, it just is really kind of fundamentally missing out on. I think a big reason why is it just has lost so much credibility, so much stature on the international stage. As this kind of independent arbiter, as someone who's going to be very well respected, who's just a universal, unquestioned position on, they are moral, they are above it all, and they're just, kind of completely good, above board, above any kind of reproach. So that is, I think, a big, big part of this very much developing story. All right, next we will be going to France in just a few seconds.
Radio Network.
Oh, baby.
Going to buck in the latest drop. Got stopped by a late cop. She got me thinking I could date a cop. Cause her uniform kept me so tight. She read me very right. She put me in a pile. She cut apart the light. She said I have the right to remain silent. Now I gotta holler. Sounding like a siren.
All right. So we have a kind of very, very interesting show today to talk a little bit. Yeah, I'm kind of tempted to go to this. I think I'll say this for, I'm not sure. This may be about the Iraq War. What is this about? My brother, who's, I feel like I'm getting more and more into politics here. It's kind of interesting. He has sent me a tweet that I don't want to play, but I'm not sure. Should we just go to it? Let's take a risk here today on the show and go to it now live. And I don't even know what it's about. Let's see. Okay, it is about Ukraine. I'm not sure. Political transitions. Well, let's just play it. Let's go.
President Maduro last night went on the...
Okay, sorry. I must apologize. This is a Matt Lee, who is a AP diplomatic reporter, and he's kind of being compared to from and a response to Glenn Greenwald on Twitter. This is a tweet that was sent to me by my brother here, and this is in a State Department press conference.
And said that they'd arrested multiple people who were allegedly behind a coup that was backed by the United States. What is your response?
These latest accusations.
This is Jen Psaki.
President Maduro last night went on the air and said that they'd arrested multiple people who were allegedly behind a coup that was backed by the United States. What is your response?
These latest accusations, like all previous such accusations, are ludicrous. As a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means. Political transitions must be democratic, constitutional, peaceful, and legal.
The U.S. has whoa. The U.S. has a long-standing practice of not promoting. What did you say? How long-standing is that? In particular, in South and Latin America, that is not a long-standing practice.
Look at that, yeah. So that's a good little clip there from Matt Lee butting in on Jen Psaki there. Thanks. Shout out to my brother Gordon for that. All right, let's get into some France conversation here. We talked about this last time on the show with Emmanuel Macron and his government surviving a pretty tough vote of no confidence. What they're trying to do is push the retirement age in France up from 62 to 64, just 2 years. And because of that, the left wing and even the right wing now are in massive protest because this bill has just failed to get through. Left and right are opposed to it, and kind of incredibly, the kind of populist left and right. But the center right, more establishment right, and the kind of centrist party that's in power, the Emmanuel Macron party, are pushing it through. They just cannot get it passed. But they do go to a obscure loophole, or law actually, article in the Constitution to be like, okay, we're pushing through 49.3, and the only way they can do that is to circumvent that. The opposition is kick him out. So it came down to populist left, populist right supporting it. So this is Macron and like the Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the Bernie Sanders type person. His party, his group, the Noops group is it's called. It's like a combination of all the left-wing parties that kind of combined in the wake of Mélenchon coming very, very close to being the opponent to Macron over Le Pen because of left-wing disunity who was just held back. They create this party, and it does pretty well in the local elections, gains a lot of seats and becomes a pretty effective bloc. So it gets this 49.3 thing, and the vote of no confidence. They got populist left, populist right saying, get Macron out of there. No 49.3. We're not pushing this through. Sorry, I don't know if I said this before, but 49.3 is pushing it through without a vote. I apologize. The Reform de retraite, the pension reform, they pushed it through without a vote, just by signing the names of a piece of paper. They made it law, and now obviously people are going crazy in France, as you know, the vote of no confidence was just held a few hours ago. And believe it or not, it literally just came down to the coalition partners, some of whom had already turned on this bill. The center-right party, which used to be the main party, the right party, but was kind of overtaken by Emmanuel Macron's party. They're the junior partners in the coalition, the Les Républicains. So it came down to them, and the vote failed by just 9 votes. Very, very tight, close situation. And the retirement law, French National Assembly rejected a no-confidence motion against the government of President Emmanuel Macron, ensuring that a contested bill raising the retirement age from 64 to 62 becomes law of the land. The motion of no confidence received 278 votes, just 9 short of the 287 to pass, 287 that is. The close result reflected the widespread anger at the overhaul of the pension law, and at Macron for his apparent aloofness in the way the measure was rammed through Parliament last week without a full vote on the bill itself. Just ramming through such a bill on French people's retirement without a vote is a pretty crazy thing to do, especially for a French president who supposedly, I mean, he married his teacher. Hopefully, you know, a teacher taught him some French history about what happens when things go against the way the people for too long. They tend not to like it. A second no confidence motion followed by the far-right National Rally failed on Monday with only 94 lawmakers voting in favor. The change, which Macron has sought since the beginning of his first term in 2017, has provoked 2 months of demonstrations in France, intermittent strikes, and occasional violence. It split France, not really split, but just 2/3. It's really a class-conscious, heavily, anti-government society. 2/3 of the population are against this overhaul. 2/3 is anything like that in America would be not nearly as popular. In the end, there were just enough votes from the center-right Republicans, who last year proposed raising the retirement age even higher to 65 to salvage the law. And the government, led by Elizabeth Warren, the Prime Minister, salvaging the government. The government would have fallen, and had the censure motion been upheld, obliging Macron to either name a new government or dissolve the National Assembly or lower house and call elections. But information later published by the National Assembly shows that 19 lawmakers from the Republican Party voted in favor of the no-confidence motion, far more than expected. The protests and anger across France seem unlikely to abate in the weeks ahead. They appear certain to mark Macron's second term, just as the Yellow Vest protest movement marked his first. Behind the movements lurks a resentment of the president's perceived elitism. I mean, not necessarily elitism, just the fact that he is really funded by the wealthiest people in France and seems to really go and govern for them is a pretty clear gripe, and at least in my opinion, it seems to hold up. Before the vote, Charles de Cousson, an independent lawmaker belonging to the group that filed the no-confidence motion, told Ms. Bourne, "You failed to unite, you failed to convince." Such was the resistance to the proposed change that rather than putting the pension overhaul to a vote in the National Assembly, he insisted he would do, Macron opted for a measure known as the 49.3 after the relevant article of the Constitution that allows the bills to be passed without a vote, but that exposed the government to censure motions such as the one on Monday. This is the 11th time in less than a year the government has resorted to the 49.3, leading to a growing... I didn't even know that. Wow. Leading to a feeling that the democratic process is being circumvented, even if the measure is illegal under the Constitution of the Fifth Republic, fashioned to create an all-powerful presidency sought by Charles de Gaulle. Mr. Macron's decision redoubled anger across the country and reinforced the impression of top-down rule. He declined, "I will not meet with you, labor union leaders." This is what he said to them in recent weeks, leaving them incensed. Before the vote, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the extreme right National Rally Party and fierce critic of raising the retirement age, told BFM TV, "For months, the government has been playing with matches in a gas station." After the vote, Ms. Le Pen told reporters that with only 9 votes short, the government had dodged a bullet. Speaking in the National Assembly, she said that Macron should still dismiss his prime minister. "Politically, the president of the republic cannot act as though nothing has happened," Ms. Le Pen said. The logic of the retirement age change at this time when people are living longer and most European states have raised retirement to 65 or over was unpersuasive to many French people fiercely attached to the country's cherished work-life balance. Oh, those silly French! Trying to hold on to their work-life balance as everyone works longer in jobs and gets paid less for them. Silly. Why would they even want to do that? What? They're way too uptight. They need to just relax a little bit. Many people in France perceive the imposition of a longer working life, albeit still shorter than that of their neighbors, as an attack on the social solidarity at the heart of the French model, and a maneuver by the rich to move closer to the unbridled capitalism they associate with l'État uni, the United States. But another quieter France saw things differently. Aron Berge, the leader of Macron's Renaissance Party, told the National Assembly that Macron's pension overhaul required courage because asking the French to work longer is always harder than making promises with money that we don't have. The problem with Aurore Berge is that she is also part of, I think when it comes down to it, on this issue, the smaller part of France.
My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWRN content better. And thank you so much for listening.
Want to get into this today, and this is also something that I haven't really looked into, but it's a part of what we really needed to do today, which is a pretty necessary, and probably something you'll only really see in mostly like left-wing circles, a pretty honest look at the Iraq War 20 years on, as they say. So it is really kind of, I saw this on the show, the show Breaking Point's pretty good show, just a very populist show, and they did a pretty, I think they have a montage out of some of the people who stood up to the Iraq War machine, because it really was, by all accounts, a pretty incredibly damaging, incredibly tough situation to do. And, I've heard it compared in some instances to cancel culture, but times 10, times 100. In the wake of 9/11, if you weren't with us, you were against this, you were part of the axis of evil, you were a Saddam apologist, you're kind of really drummed out of public life in a really effective way, and people just also like see you on the street, look at you like, you do not love America, things like that. It was a very, very brutal time for people who were really not 100% behind the United States war machine in this instance. And someone who wasn't at the time was Ben Burgess, and he had this column in the Jacobin magazine, Memory Today. Since I was alive, I will kind of go through this, and I think it's a pretty well-written piece. 20 years ago today, U.S. and allied ground troops invaded Iraq. The shock and awe bombing campaign had started the day before. What happened on March 20th, 2003 wasn't a mistake. It was well-intentioned but unwise. It wasn't well-intentioned but unwise. It was a calculated, premeditated crime on a massive scale. Thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died in a war premised on transparently nonsensical lies. By the time President George Bush ordered the invasion, I'd spent months watching anti-war protests and sending and organizing meetings in church basements. On February 15, 2003, the Greater Lansing Network Against the War in Iraq brought 4,000 people out to the streets of my hometown, marching from the Union Building at Michigan State to the steps, Michigan State University, to the steps of the state capitol in Lansing. It was just a small part of really what was an incredibly large protest. Millions of people. I think, I don't know. I actually don't know many, but it was billions and billions of people outside in the streets protesting. I think in a single day, kind of in the lead up to the Iraq War. They didn't listen, and in the coming months, more than 4,000 Americans came home in flag-draped coffins. One of those coffins held the body of a kid whom I went to high school with. He was 17 when he joined the Army, 4 years too young to go to one of the bars crammed with MSU students on Friday and Saturday nights in East Lansing, 8 years too young to rent a car, and a year young to be eligible to vote for any of the politicians who decided to throw his life away on a cruel and stupid war of choice. And it wasn't just the crazy ones, it wasn't just the people who were just like, we hate the Muslims now. It was your liberal faves, it was Hillary Clinton, it was, Joe Biden, it was all of these people, the entire establishment completely behind and supporting this war, making it kind of a cultural force on you. And it really just was a complete and just total crime. We had friends in common, but he and I didn't hang out, so I have no idea what his motives were for listening, but I have to imagine the recruiters told him the usual things about how the U.S. military exists to defend freedom. Instead, he died on the other side of the world in the process of imposing an occupation bitterly resented by the vast majority of Iraqis. And the consequences for ordinary Iraqis really did, dwarf the coalition casualties and suffering and whatever they had. According to an estimate published this month by the Watson Institute at Brown University, since the invasion began, 550,000, and 508,000 people died in Iraq and then Syria when the chaos spread there, and several times as many have died due to indirect causes such as preventable diseases. In addition, more than 7 million people fled two countries, and another 8 million became internal refugees. In a speech the year before the invasion, Bush castigated Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as the axis of evil. The idea that Saddam Hussein's Iraq, just went a Republican there for a minute, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, who fought a long and bloody war throughout the 1980s, were part of an axis, was already bizarre. And by the way, we sold weapons to both sides of that war, fun fact, before you throw in North Korea, but this was at the height of America's post-9/11 jingoistic fervor, and Bush's rhetoric didn't have to make sense for a huge portion of the country to nod along. The author of the speech, David Frum, might have slunk away from the public life in shame after the catastrophe of consequences of Bush's wars in the Middle East became clear, as if he was capable of shame. Instead, he's the author of a really jaw-dropping piece in The Atlantic, The Iraq War Reconsidered. In it, Frum admits the war went badly and grants that it may have been pragmatically unwise, even as he insists the United States didn't act with unprovoked aggression, invading the most secular nation in the Middle East that had no relation to Osama bin Laden, and in fact they made up a relation to Osama bin Laden, United States did, of Iraq. Above all, he seems to regret that debacle in Iraq dampened public enthusiasm for wars elsewhere, which is really, probably the one silver lining of Iraq in this entire situation. And just, again, we talk about the beginning of the show with war crimes. Why isn't the United States taken seriously anymore as kind of this moral arbiter of what's right and what's wrong? This is why. These people, they're not in The Hague, where we would invade and take them out even if they were. They're writing columns in our most respectable political magazines. Anyway, so Trump says, again, the belief that America could be a force for good in the world sadly and wrongly dimmed. Memories of Iraq became a powerful resource for extremists and authoritarians who wanted to push democracy aside and leave the world to autocrats. Frum said the Iraq invasion wasn't unprovoked aggression because the first Gulf War of 1990 to 91 was clearly legitimate given Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and Iraq hadn't complied with the conditions of the ceasefire. But if Frum was serious about this argument, he would also have to maintain that if some other powers had bombed U.S. cities after, say, the U.S. invasion of Grenada or the U.S. invasion of Panama, this would have been clearly legitimate, and any other U.S. violations of subsequent ceasefire would have been grounds for the cluster bombing, invasion, and long-term occupation of an entire country. Does Frum really think that? Does anyone think that? No, they're just absurd. So anyway, at the time, Bush and his cronies, they didn't say we're going to invade Iraq because there were some ceasefire violations from the war that ended 12 years ago, and that's all the justification that we need. Instead, they asserted that Saddam Hussein, A, had weapons of mass destruction, and B, A, he had weapons of mass destruction, and B, the Iraqi dictator, who had long, really brutally repressed local Islamists, and again, was the most secular country in the region, was now going to share the WMDs with his mortal enemies in Al-Qaeda. The Bush administration officials argued that this theoretical possibility of the WMDs falling in Al-Qaeda's hands was too terrifying for anyone to even wait for real evidence. The smoking gun, Vice President Dick Cheney famously said, could be in the form of a mushroom cloud over a United States city. That was Dick Cheney in speech, and who was the speechwriter at the time that wrote that remark? None other than David Frum. So anyway, all of this nonsensical. All this is nonsensical in the same way that Vladimir Putin's claim that he invaded Ukraine to demilitarize and denazify that country was just as, frankly, nonsensical. Even if there had been any reason to believe, A, the absurdity, and B, it really would have made it irrelevant. David Frum claims to have been shocked that there was no WMDs in Iraq, and it's true that much of what the Bush administration said about WMDs turned out to be based on deliberate distortion, but even at the time, the evidence presented to the public was pretty paper thin. I can remember arguing with this. I'm arguing about this with a professor in my political science class in 2002. The professor, a fairly liberal Democrat, told us that Iraq had chemical and biological weapons and was at least working on nuclear weapons. When I asked how he could possibly know that, he referred to the president's many confident statements. Surely all these assertions were based on information Bush was getting from the intelligence agencies. I didn't buy it. If definitive evidence existed, then why weren't they sharing it? The way that, for example, John F. Kennedy's administration showed the whole world surveillance pictures of Soviet missiles in Cuba back in 1962. The closest we got was Secretary of State Colin Powell waving around a vial of anthrax at the United Nations as he made wild claims about the Iraqi threat. I watched Powell's speech with a group of anti-war students at my college, and I remember at one point he shared Iraqi intercepted communications that vaguely referred to trucks, and Powell asserted, as if it was the only possible interpretation, the trucks in question were, quote, mobile chemical weapons labs. I was amazed that anyone, anywhere, was taking this so seriously. The skepticism didn't make me unique. Again, 6 to 10 million of us marched in anti-war protests that February. The global anti-war movement was absolutely correct, and no one who was on the wrong side in 2003 should be allowed to forget it. And again, they face no punishment and really are only promoted and elevated in political society. Not shameless schools like David Frum, not the politicians in both parties who voted for war because they were afraid of looking weak, and not all the oh-so-clever centrist pundits who ran for cover the moment the Bush administration, the cover for the Bush administration on their blogs. They ran cover for the Bush administration on their blogs or New York Times op-eds. None of these people were making an innocent mistake. They were throwing in their lot with conspirators openly planning to destroy a society on the other side of the world, killing hundreds of thousands at minimum in the process, in a war that was based on barely coherent nonsense. A war that was very good for shareholders at Halliburton and Raytheon and Lockheed, and bad for everyone else. This isn't a live and learn situation. The invasion of Iraq wasn't a mistake. It was a crime, and it is unforgivable. That is a very good and well put point by Ben Burgess. in Jacobin. And I think it really does go to show like this. While there was so many people who kind of did realize the BS, there was some good reporting out there in the media and in popular culture. People were booed. The establishment opinion was so strongly. We have to go to war. We have to do this. To get back at terrorism, Osama bin Laden, weapons of mass destruction, all that kind of stuff, all the the hysterics that were. And at the time, everyone knows they were hysterical. Everyone knows it was full of crap. But the thing is now, Iraq is destroyed, and it shows no signs of really getting on a much better track soon. And if you were, again, it's just so unbelievable and just incomprehensible as an American to sit through the fact that, we did this thing, we did this horrific invasion, all this stuff was revealed, and these people face absolutely no consequence for the immense, incredible amount of suffering that was caused. And then they just, like nothing happened, have the gall to come in and turn around and go to other people and say, now you have to start doing it. It's like, while people like Vladimir Putin should be right up there alongside, the perpetrators of the Iraq War, they have no credibility to do so. They just have no credibility in it. I think that's really coming through in a lot of this, and just you can take a look at some of these clips put together by Breaking Points about how things fared. In how certain people fared at the time when they were kind of put up to the microscope. These anti-war people were put up to the microscope on TV.
The matter is that our allies now in that region, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, those countries say, don't do it. It would cause chaos in the region. The truth of the matter is, in my view, the happiest guy in the world would be Osama bin Laden if the United States waged a unilateral invasion of Iraq, because he would have more recruits for terrorism against this country that he could ever use.
September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be,
I believe that's Bartley, who I believe was the who's speaking now, was I believe the only vote against the authorization of military force passed by the Bush administration that enabled all of the war on terror and so much of what the United States does in the Middle East and just kind of really interventionist military operations from 2001 on. She was the only vote against the war in Afghanistan, and she faced death threats and insults and all that stuff. She was also the only vote against the AUMF on September 14th, 2021. So again, eternal credit to her for being right, seeing this issue. And supporting her for Senate, that is for sure.
Must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
I don't oppose war in all circumstances. And when I look out over this crowd today, I know there is no shortage of patriots or patriotism. What I do oppose is a dumb war.
Us rushing headlong into a war unilaterally was a mistake and may still be a mistake. If it has happened, then at that point what the debate's really going to be about is what's our long-term commitment there? How much is it going to cost? What does it mean for us to rebuild Iraq? How do we stabilize and make sure that this country doesn't splinter into factions between the Shias and the Kurds and the Sunnis?
So that is a lot of Barack Obama in there. He was definitely someone who's pretty against the war. We have some more here. Phil Donahue was fired from MSNBC for being against the war.
In this nation was silence, really. And I believe most people at that time opposed this war. Most people did. They said, what are we, why, how come over there? And yet every major metropolitan newspaper in this country supported the invasion of Iraq. Think about that for a minute. Every major metropolitan. This is what you can do with the politics of fear. The Bush took this whole nation and the whole media establishment by the ear and led it right into the sword. Amazing. In the land of free speech, free press.
We live in a time.
Michael Moore getting booed at the Oscars for winning Bowling for Columbine.
For fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts.
Who's booing? Who's booing?
Bush.
He's right.
Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
For all the talk of Hollywood being liberal and all that, at the time when it was in vogue, they were booing him.
Yeah, that's right. Sal Grangetti there from Breaking Points making that comment. But yeah, that's a really, a great point. Just how viscerally, just aggressive people were about this stuff. But when it's all said and done, in January 2015, we got, that's 12, 13 years out of the war, 12 years, almost, whatever. As the Islamic State militants were waging an offensive across Iraq and Syria, an Iranian intelligence officer, known among his colleagues by the codename Boroujerdi, sat down for a meeting with an important official, then the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. The meeting, held at Abadi's Iraqi presidential palace in Baghdad, took place without the presence of a secretary or a third person, according to a report about the discussion contained in a leaked archive of cables from Iran's shadowy Ministry of Intelligence and Security. Abadi was a member of Iraq's exiled political class, mostly Shia, who had returned to take power following the U.S. invasion. The two men discussed a range of topics, including the threat of ISIS to the Iraqi state and the role of foreign powers like Turkey and Saudi Arabia in the region. Finally, the position of the West. At least they agreed in one point. And they really kind of came to an agreement around the idea that despite the threat of ISIS and other regional powers, the political conditions wrought by the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the removal of Saddam Hussein had created an opportunity for the Islamic Republic of Iran and its allied Iraqi elites to take advantage of the situation, according to this Ministry of Intelligence and Security report. 20 years after the U.S. troops first invaded Iraq, the classified Iranian intelligence documents, which were leaked to The Intercept and first reported in a series of stories that were published beginning in 2019, shed light on the important questions of who actually won the war. One victor emerges clearly from hundreds of pages of documents: Iran. Today, Iran enjoys privileged access to Iraq's political system and economy, while the United States has been reduced to a minor player. Iraqis themselves remain fractiously divided. Many of their own political elites are close allies of Iran, and the Ministry of Intelligence and Security cables, which were written between 2013 and 15, the peak of international campaign against ISIS, provide no shortage of examples of the expansion of Iran's influence in Iraq. While helping train and organize Iraqi security forces who are ideologically tied to the Islamic Republic, activities documented at length in the cables, Iranian officials had also been routinely involved in promoting favored Iraqi politicians to important roles in the Iraqi government to protect the political and economic interests of Iran. One classified 2014 report containing the trove of Iranian cables described then-future Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi's as having a special relationship with Iran and named a laundry list of other Iraqi cabinet members who are close to the Islamic Republic of Iran, often people who have spent years exiled in Iran. The cables discuss how these close relationships have benefited Iran, including having sympathetic Iraqi officials give Iran access to Iraqi airspace and pretty vital transportation connections with their allies in Syria. The privileged conversation between Boroujerdi and Abadi was being replicated at the time, really at many levels of the Iraqi government and society. In the cables, Iranian government officials They documented their work to solidify business and security interests in Iraq while obtaining oil and development contracts in the northern Kurdish regions and water purification projects in the south. The latter one with a $16 million bribe paid to an Iraqi member of parliament, according to one of the documents. The cables also show how former Iraqi military officials, including individuals trained or supported by the U.S. during the occupation, had been pressed into the service of Iranian intelligence, with one typical operative described as being forced to collaborate to save himself. So yeah, that's like, you can see kind of how this happened here, and you can see, I think, once again, really, that, in the clips that we just played before, Bernie Sanders was right on the money. Like, this is going to create more chaos in the region. He said that at the time, it's going to create more chaos in the region. It's going to, create more recruits for terrorism. We'll look at, what happened and how that kind of led to the formation of ISIS, some of the chaos created in that region. And it's just going to, our allies in the region, they said at the time, don't do it. And they, just like Bernie Sanders, were, eventually proved right. All right. And speaking of, remembering, we are remembering now, I guess, that our show is over. So have a great one, and we'll be back tomorrow for another show. We're going all throughout the week, everyone. Have a great night.